Welcome to Too Complicated for History. My name is Isaac S. Loftus, and I am joined by my co-host, Dr. Lynn Price Robbins, and we come to you twice a month to bring to you the history that has fallen through the cracks of your curriculum. And I wanted to start today's episode off with a story, a little bit of tension, suspense, before we get into the subject and our guest today. But it'll make sense in a minute. So, my wife's aunt, over the last year, has had some dental work done. About a year ago, she had to have a tooth removed because of some periodontal disease and issues that she was dealing with. One tooth, it was in the front, so it affected her smile. It was a little bit off-putting at first, but and she was uncomfortable with it, but was able to sort of deal with it. 3 months ago, she had to have 3 more teeth removed from the front of her mouth. And I will say, I was shocked. It didn't seem like a big deal to me when we first heard about it, but I was shocked at how dramatic tooth removal can be in changing who you are and how you present yourself to the world. It changes the way you speak, it changes the way you talk, and it changes the way you feel about yourself. It was an eye-opening experience and honestly made me brush my teeth more often. But that is all to say, we're going to get into the history of, for lack of a better word, teeth. And all there is to say, and I think this is a more important subject than a lot of us give it credit for. Our guest today is Lucy Smith. She's a PhD candidate at the University of Michigan, and her dissertation is titled The Atlantic Bite, Circulation, Economy, and the Meaning of Teeth in George Washington's World. Thank you so much for being here, Lucy.
Thank you for having me and for your story of introduction there. Because as you're right, I don't think until we kind of experience it firsthand, kind of realized how much teeth are really kind of part of us and affect lots of different aspects of our world today.
Yeah, I'll hand it off to Lynn to start getting into the meat of the history. But for the people who are just listening, I will say Lucy has wonderful teeth.
She does.
I do, and that is because it will, as I'm sure we'll get into it, I had braces like many folks do in America these days that I didn't actually necessarily medically need. But that was just the kind of social custom and the norm because we know we read people based on their teeth. So I do indeed have some pearly whites.
Well, I want to know. So I think this is fascinating. I'm going to be honest. I don't like going to the dentist. I'm kind of scared of them. Is it the orthodontist who do the teeth pulling and the root canals? I've had a few root canals, one tooth pulled. Okay, well, those are also quite terrifying. So I'm just going to put that out there. Yet I love your topic.
Well, and I will say, Lynn, the more you study this topic, the more terrified of the dentist I get. Because, I know now, especially when it's the same tools that are on that little tray as I see in collections. It's like, I would have liked to have our technology to advance.
I am not afraid of the dentist, and I'm worried that now at the end of this conversation, I'm going to be.
It is a risk you're going to have to take.
You'll have enough knowledge now that you'll know you should be afraid. Yeah. So what I'm interested in, well, tell us, if you could tell us a little bit about your background, because, your museums, education, Mount Vernon, we want to know about that. But then how in the world you stumbled upon teeth?
Yeah, why teeth?
How did you get there? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as you might imagine, it's not, every little girl's dream to grow up and be the teeth person, right? Or maybe just really cool kids. But that wasn't me. But actually, I ended up kind of stumbling into this project due to my kind of professional background. So prior to graduate school, I worked in the museum field, primarily museum education, worked for National Park Service and other kind of private institutions. Including most recently as the education specialist at George Washington's Mount Vernon, which is, as you might think, if you think about teeth in the 18th world, you think about George. But even at the time there, his dentures and kind of teeth in general were not really kind of on the forefront of my mind. But in my position there, I helped kind of organize and manage the George Washington Teacher Institute, which Lynn has spoken at many times. And what we do is we bring in scholars from kind of around the country, and included Michael Twitty, the culinary historian. And Michael was making this comment kind of talking about the history of Southern foodways. And Southern foodways are really Black foodways, which are really African foodways. And how Washington is not only consuming kind of, African descended foodways prepared by African descendants folks, but also particularly needed kind of like African teeth, kind of referring to the human teeth that are in Washington's kind of dentures and things like that. And that comment really stuck with me and kind of left it there on the back burner and applied to graduate school. Once again, not thinking I'd be writing about teeth, but ended up kind of, oh, maybe see there's enough out there for a journal article or for a seminar paper. We'll see. And as I started to get in and look a little bit more and really, dig my teeth into it, as it were, I found out that, there's actually a lot there that hasn't really been looked at or addressed. And that's how I ended up studying about teeth.
So I think the most important question that everyone has right now is, were George Washington's dentures made out of wood?
They were not made out of wood, contrary to
What?
popular belief. I know. Well, what's even more kind of remarkable about that myth is we actually don't know where it comes from. So it's not like Washington chopping down the cherry tree or something like that, where we can direct it. It is from Parson Weems' fables. Period. We know that, right?
Yeah.
The wooden teeth myth, it's murky, nor is it really clear when it actually becomes kind of part of the public consciousness. When does that become normalized? So one of the kind of places I'm looking at actually are children's books throughout the 19th and 20th century to kind of figure out, okay, when do we start?
By the way, that was exactly where my head went. 'Cause I have a young kid, and I was like, knowing, because I do know, and another bit of suspense, we do know what they were made out of, and it's worse than you think. But I was thinking about, it's definitely for kids, because I was like, why would I make that up? And if my son, who was too young to ask this now, was like, oh, he had dentures, what were they made out of? I would 100% lie. Like 100%. And wood seems like a good enough, like as good a lie as any to sort of like wash over what the actual history is there.
Exactly. And there are times when that's needed. And I mean, that's when I found kind of ironically that like some of the children's books actually have the best Washington dental history. Because there was this big campaign in the early 20th century for kind of a public health campaign to get folks kind of brushing and caring for their teeth, particularly out of anxiety around new immigrants coming into this country. And so to be a good American, you're going to have like a certain kind of smile, which would I argue this all happens kind of during Washington's time period where that association happens. But that's where actually, so a lot of kids' books in the early 20th century are pretty good, but then they start kind of going pretty wild. The kind of, and once again, there's not a firm kind of, understanding exactly where this myth came from.
Sure.
So the kind of prevailing theory that's out there is one that since a lot of artificial teeth at the time were made by ivory, and ivory doesn't have enamel on it like human teeth does, so it would take on staining, and that staining would then look kind of like wood grain.
Oh.
So that's one argument that's out there. Another argument that I'm arguing, one place where it might potentially be coming from is there was several procedures that utilized wood in fixing teeth. So what I mean by that is if you have kind of there's going to be a lot of visceral, uncomfortable moments, by the way. It's just want to get you prepped right now.
Sounds good.
I have to give this talk during like luncheons, and it's very uncomfortable for everyone involved. You would frequently have in the 18th century stumps of teeth where they would try to extract the teeth and it would kind of break in half.
Yeah.
Which is, it's uncomfortable. So one technique that they would do to kind of affix another artificial tooth, right? This is before there's like crowns or like, glues, adhesives, things like that we have today. You would kind of stick a thin piece of wood in between the gum and the tooth, and then you'd attach then kind of on top of that the crown made out of ivory or something else, and then kind of bind it to that small little piece of wood to kind of hold it in place. So that's one potential place as well where that myth might have come from. But, at the time, the 18th century, no one is looking at Washington's mouth and thinking that's made of wood. It's something that is certainly a much later kind of idea that gets kind of projected back.
Sorry. I'm just trying to absorb the procedure that you just described.
Oh, it gets better.
I got a bunch more stories like that. We're not even started yet.
Oh yeah,
that is brutal in a way that I am not quite sure I want to believe.
You're going to be scared
real.
of the dentist.
Anyway, This episode of Too Complicated for History is brought to you by our supporters over on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show and join the conversation, our membership is completely free. And that gives you access to our Discord, which is a place for like-minded history fans and even some of the historians that we've interviewed to just chat, hang out, and ask interesting questions. Our paid tiers give you access to exclusive content, live streams, and even signed book giveaways. Check it out today at patreon.com/primarysourcemedia. That's patreon.com/primarysourcemedia.
We do it better now. We do it much better now. Like silver lining.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I've been to the dentist. Like the Novocain is not fun to get the injections, but usually after that, everything is kind of smooth sailing. I can't imagine doing all of this sans any kind of anesthetic.
Yeah.
Especially when you're just like shoving pieces of wood up into the gum cavity.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh. All right.
Well, it's one of the reasons why the first kind of use or formalization of anesthesia was actually from a dentist in Connecticut in the 1830s, and it came from the dental thing. Because I think it's hard for us to think about today unless you've had like your aunt kind of some serious kind of dental work done. That for most of us, our association with our teeth or our pain or tooth loss comes from when we're children, right? And you're losing teeth, and while that can be dramatic, it's it's very manageable, right?
Yeah.
But having just those how many nerves, right, are in there, and those exposed nerves, I mean, they just really affect everyone. I think it's hard for us to kind of lose track in our current medical landscape, but up until really the late 20th century, I mean, toothache is a really big concern. Both in terms of physical pain, in terms of labor, in terms of kind of aesthetic. I mean, it is a kind of constant source of anxiety because it was really prevalent, and kind of everybody got it at some point in their lives.
Right.
More and more as life expectancy, expanded.
Yeah.
So I've got some. It's not quite background, but like just some moderately morbid general questions.
Lay it on me.
Since you've delved into the history of teeth, and like you feel like the right person to ask. So it seems to me like that teeth play a big part in horror motifs, like in like gothic, like in many ways, like whether it's like horror movie monsters or things like that, or just stuff with teeth. Even when I took my son to the dentist, they had a stuffed animal that had a full set of teeth, and it is off-putting. Yeah, Lynn, exactly. Yeah, it is not comfortable. There's something so intrinsically human about like the human set of teeth. Like there's a fish that has human-looking set of teeth, and it's very upsetting to see.
It is.
I don't know. Like, is this uncanny? Like, have people always felt this way about teeth? That it's like a very personal, very human thing. It's odd because they're so inert, right? But they feel so part of us. Like there's something human about it. Like if something else had teeth, I'd be like, oh my gosh. Like that's there is something that deeply unsettles the uncanny valley when teeth are involved outside of the places where they're supposed to be. Have people always had that kind of feeling towards teeth, or is that like a modern thing?
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's kind of the heart of what I'm actually looking at is this kind of change where we start to have kind of the associations we have today, right? Of that kind of creepiness. As a fan of B movies and horror films, I know exactly the kind of genre you're speaking of. And teeth are really kind of heavily focused there, as well as kind of dentists and torture and kind of all of that. But there is an uncanniness, right? I mean, I think you see it often on kind of like pop history, pop science. You'll see a lot of early dentists that are kind of charlatans of like hats with like teeth sewn onto them and things like that. For example, there's a visceralness to that, right? One of my favorite kind of side projects is once you start looking for teeth, they're hard not to see everywhere. And since dentists in our current world have to advertise because our health insurance and dental insurance are separate, you'll often see icons of teeth brushing like at dentists, but it'll be the icon of a tooth with its own teeth that it's then brushing.
Yeah.
I think a lot about it. I think a lot about it more than I really should.
It's like toothception.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of my like favorite now like genres of dental advertising. You'll see it. There's a lot of them out there. But it really gets to the heart is that the way that, and one of the hard things to think about the history of teeth, right, is we have to kind of decouple our own relationship with our mouth and with teeth, right? We are kind of at the end of this internalization, right? And so, for example, as you said, teeth are kind of part of us. They're part of our bodies, right? There's a physicality to it. There's a relationship with it, in part because of the science and omic Noah. Like this is the only set. I mean, after we lose kind of our teeth, our first teeth fall out. This is all we got. We're like sharks. It's got a bunch of them kind of stacked up, right? We also know with our kind of expanded life spans that we're going to lose teeth in our lifetime. Our teeth and our mouths are designed for about 30 to 40 years. And because of medicine, we're better at maintaining them, but they don't keep up at the same rate as kind of other kind of evolutionary medical advancements that we've had. And so we have a pretty intimate relationship with them because we know how to read people and read people by their smile and their teeth. right? We judge people today based on their smile, based on their teeth. You said for yourself, for your aunt, like she's having to kind of imagine herself a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
right? And envision herself differently, because we associate tooth loss with some sort of moral failing. You did something wrong. You did not maintain it. You did not do X or Y. You did not go to the dentist enough.
Interesting.
All of that. So we now judge you on that, right? We also can
Yeah.
think about it in terms of all of the advertising, anti-drug advertising, particularly in the 90s and early 2000s, like of meth mouth and other things like that. So we are trained to read people's mouth, both, as you said at the beginning, like, my straight white teeth, right?
Yeah.
That tells you a little bit of the, what is my social class growing up. That tells you a lot about my country of origin. It tells me kind of access to those sorts of things. And so, we know today that for folks who are missing teeth, it's really hard for folks to get a lot of jobs, especially if they're working with the public. So a lot of folks with missing teeth, are regulated to lower paying jobs, often kind of back of house kind of positions, in more kind of precarious economic situations where they're also then not going to have access to dental services, because once again, health insurance and dental insurance are separate. And it's really difficult for patients on Medicaid actually to gain and access dental care in this country. So you have this problem that kind of reinforces it and essentially kind of penalizes people for having bodies that exist. But that's all where we are now, right? I mean, you mentioned kind of at the top, you can hear your son kind of crying in the background. He's getting put down for a nap. And I don't know if you've thought about this, but a lot of people save baby teeth today.
Oh,
right?
my mom did. It's super weird.
Yeah, no, it's a weird. My father saved mine. My mother thought that was weird, but my father did, because we have a relationship with that, right? We have the tooth fairy. We have this kind of relationship. It's remembering of this coming of age moment, right? It means something. In the 18th century, and kind of is when we start to get to the point where it means something. Before that, teeth are a part of the body, sure, and yes, there's some aesthetics, and that sort of thing, but there isn't a kind of deeply personal relationship with it, in part because tooth loss was just normal. It happened a lot. If you saw someone missing teeth, you wouldn't do what I think a lot of Americans do today, is kind of recoil. People have a visceral response if somebody smiles and is missing a fair amount of teeth.
Yeah.
That wasn't necessarily the case back then. And so to get that kind of uncanny valley of it, I certainly don't see it in terms of, the reason why I'm saying I don't think there was kind of a unnervingness to it.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about, for example, a lot of, this is obviously in Western European culture, and a lot of the kind of illuminated manuscripts, you have the whole genre of animals with very human-like faces,
Right.
that would often also have like human teeth as well.
Yeah.
And so I feel like if there was an inherent kind of uneasiness with that, you're probably not going to be putting that throughout your religious texts, right? There's kind of already a relationship kind of with that. I mean, people were certainly still kind of, had certain kind of notions of beauty standards and things like that.
Right.
But there wasn't a kind of moralistic or virtuous kind of connotations of teeth until throughout the 18th century, when there's a bunch of different things kind of come together to lead to lots of new kinds of meanings about teeth that we still see today.
Interesting.
Right. So can we go back to before teeth were even, they weren't as important as far as how you physically look. So you just, I'm in
teeth.
pain.
We're going pre-teeth
Well,
now.
I don't care. We're all missing teeth, right? Like we all have like 3 teeth left. And my, one of my 3 hurts. And so I'm going to go to, dentists don't exist yet. So I'm going to go to somebody and say, help me. So what's going to happen to me? How will they help me?
How do they help?
It's not,
air quotes.
Help, it's definitely an air quotes help situation. Yeah. So the dental landscape kind of before that, your main only route is extraction, right? It has to be physically removed. If it's starting to have a toothache and start to rot, things like that, you got to get it out. So for that, you're going to have several kind of options. And I will say as first, there's a lot of domestic care that is happening. So there's a lot of medicinal recipes that women are knowing and are practicing often for pain alleviation. So the traditional kind of dental history narrative really talks about the professionalization of dentists and often leaves out domestic knowledge in those conversations. So what you're going to do is you're going to have kind of home remedies that you're going to be trying to try to ease kind of pain, as well as some home remedies that are going to kind of help, quote unquote, brush your teeth and things like that. I mean, people are they're not living in an existing world where they're just like, what's with this stuff on my teeth? Like they're aware of it, right?
Yeah, so people did clean their teeth. There's like notions that people in the past, no one cleaned their teeth and they all stank with bad breath and stuff like that. That's not the case.
Exactly. They were still cleaning their teeth. I mean, they certainly had bad breath.
Right, but like, they were doing something. They didn't just, it wasn't like, we all stink and we're fine with it.
Let's just wait for them to fall out. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. No, there is like preventative care as we would think of it today.
Okay.
And there's a lot of different debates about it as kind of medical understandings change. So for some folks, it's like very unhealthy. There's a lot of anxiety about cold water. And if you were to gargle with cold water, because this is a point where there's kind of humor systems where it's like hot and cold and all of these sorts of things. You'll see, toothpicks and things like that, tooth scrapers, you will see toothbrushes. There's a lot of recipes, kind of home remedies for things to quote clean the teeth, as well as certainly there's a lot of both indigenous knowledge in North America as well as in Africa as well for folks that are also kind of maintaining dental health care. So there is certainly this kind of knowledge system and there were certainly kind of toothbrush-like items.
They were doing something.
That certainly existed, for sure. But so it's going to be your first line of defense essentially is to have home. But once again, this, I will say this, the dental care, it's not like brush your teeth 3 times a day. It's not that. It's like once a week, kind of a thing that's happening.
However often you change your towel, in the bathroom.
Well, exactly. I was, over a hygiene kind of curriculum course for one of the ladies' seminary schools. And they were like, you should definitely change your underwear on a regular basis. And I was like, that seems like a good instinct. But they also included you should wash your feet, what was it? Twice a year, once in the spring and once in the winter. I was like, I feel like you should wash your feet more than that.
I feel like it's not that much effort. I mean, if you can find some water, come on.
Exactly. So that was like, cool. But in the same school, they did make them brush their teeth twice a day. So, it's useful for me. They
wanted to... This is terrible.
Yeah, the top half.
A good gradient of
it just goes down
filth,
and just
from
forget
top to bottom. Yeah.
And they weren't quite there yet. But to get your question, like, what is the dental landscape kind of pre-dentist? So, so you're going to have your preventative kind of care stuff at home and kind of pain management. But then what you need to do is you need to get that tooth extracted.
Right.
You have several options. But most of it is you need somebody who, A, has the physical strength to actually remove a tooth.
Right.
Once again, if your association of tooth loss is from when you're a child, like, those roots are in there deep. It requires a lot of physical strength. So you need someone with physical strength. You need somebody also with tools. Somebody needs to have a tool that can grip your tooth and pull it out. So what ends up happening, and this is similar for a lot of other kind of medical procedures in the Western medical tradition, you would end up kind of going to like a blacksmith or someone like that because they're going to be physically very strong and they're going to have the kind of tools to be able to do that. And most villages, communities, you're going to have a blacksmith. It's kind of a necessity to have within a lot of kind of Western culture. So that's one option. Your other option is the tooth drawer. This is not somebody who makes a painting of your teeth or, sketches them, but is drawing them out of your head, pulling them out of your head.
Oh gosh, that's a nice way to put it.
Exactly. It's much more, it takes away some of the grit.
Yeah.
But this is really, captured in all kinds of art traditions. I mean, certainly Caravaggio is painting about this. Goya is painting about this. There's a lot of even, medieval prints and kind of all of that is there as well of these tooth drawers that were often very they were entertainers first and foremost.
Oh, great.
Entertainers.
That's
that is
what I
not
want.
what I thought you were going to say.
You would show up in town or into your village or your town square, and you would often kind of have, you'd be traveling, so you'd be itinerant, which is inherently a little bit suspect, right?
Yeah.
Moving around. You'd show up, some people even buy like tickets for this, and they would kind of put on a big performance of, someone would come up and they would sit there and they'd kind of, a lot of times they all had, European names from kind of not really known some places in Italy, they're kind of making this up, and they're real showmen. And they're kind of pulling your tooth kind of in public while all these kind of other people are watching. It's a real spectacle.
Wow.
Exactly. And so those are kind of your kind of two options of where you're going to go is either kind of your local blacksmith kind of person or someone who theoretically has more training, I'm using quotes on that one, are these kinds of entertainer-like figures that are going to be kind of moving around. and obviously those folks that are moving around are met with a fair amount of suspicion, right? Not only are they moving around in a time, before the internet, so I don't necessarily know who you are, but also it's seen as kind of, like I said, it's this public kind of act. And so that also means we have to think about it now. I can't speak for y'all, but for me, when I go to the dentist, the last thing I want is a bunch of people like watching it, outside, right?
Right.
Like
Right?
that seems like a private act,
Yeah.
but before this was a really public kind of display act, for most, now obviously not for your like super elites, but for a lot of folk,
Right.
which means once again, that relationship with the teeth and tooth itself, it's not as intimate, right? It's not as
Yeah.
personal because it is kind of this kind of public performance to some degree.
Did they
That's
give them at least alcohol, something to numb the pain? Because I have had a tooth pulled, and even with all the Novocain and crap, it still hurt.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, not too much that I'm seeing, or at least it's not like recommended in treatises. I will say a lot of the visual depictions of a lot of these extractions, they're often happening in taverns. So I'm
Okay.
assuming, or you need some liquid courage to be like, all right, just go in and get it,
Right. Yeah, just to get there.
Exactly. And so instead of getting tattoos, they're getting their teeth extracted. So they're certainly seeing kind of that kind of thing. But I
now.
also think,
Okay,
which is
sorry.
also need to keep in mind too, that while it was excruciatingly painful, we also need to remember that relationship with pain really changes over time,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
People were in a lot of physical pain all the time. And when
That's
you're in kind
true.
of physical pain all the time, it literally reworks some of your brain and your receptors. So, I mean, people
Mm-hmm.
are still feeling it, and we're not trying to minimize that by any means. But for us, it sounds so kind of shocking, right?
Right.
Um, and it was certainly intense, but that was just kind of part of the patchwork of life. In a
Mm-hmm.
way, for us today, we kind of have a different kind of pain threshold and pain
Yeah.
patchwork.
Right. That's a
Yeah,
great
like
point.
I'm thinking of one of the opening scenes in Master and Commander where they have to amputate the boy's arm at the very
Oh,
beginning of that movie,
yeah.
and it makes me want to throw up. Like just
Mm-hmm.
even, I mean, I was like, I know it's fiction. I know that as an actor, everything in my brain says that this is fake and whatever. When he bites down on that stick or whatever he's biting, it's not, he's not actually feeling any pain. But like the fact that people actually went through that like boggles my
I
mind.
know.
Yeah.
It confuses me. I can't wrap my head around it at all. So yeah, it definitely have a different relationship with pain now. So also it is, when did it switch? So like you're talking about Washington and this, like when did that start to become, like when did they start to matter, I guess is a
Yeah.
good way to put it.
Yeah. So the kind of like line in the sand that a lot of folks kind of in the dental community talk about, which there's not many of us, but there's at least a handful of us.
I can't imagine there's a lot of dentists that are spending a lot of time doing it. My dentist definitely is not.
I would say, yeah, less today, but certainly throughout the 20th century, especially like in like the 20s and 30s, and again in like the 60s, 70s, 80s, there was a lot of retired dentists or dentists who then also were like, I'm going to recreate Washington's dentures. And to be fair, I've done a lot of really great archival research that has been really useful for me, as well as it is useful to have an actual dentist to be like, okay, this works, that doesn't work.
Right.
Because
Sure.
I'm working on getting the wrong kind of doctorate,
Right.
for this kind of work. So it's really kind of the traditional line, and it really shifts around the 1720s. And we can really kind of trace and kind of the hallmark for that is the publication of a treatise in France by Pierre Fouchard, who writes on this kind of management of teeth. And it's kind of, it's a written treatise, so it's kind of in that kind of institutional kind of structure that's there, right? And so you kind of see the kind of professional medicalization. This is also, we start seeing kind of enlightenment, right? And all of those kinds of ideas. So there's already shifting medical discourses and conversations, and teeth end up kind of really getting part of that, particularly kind of as this subsection of dentistry. And part of what Fouchard wants to do is like literally institutionalize it in the sense of, let's have books about it. Let's actually have some sort of medical training around this for all of our surgeons and things like that in the French military and other places.
Mm-hmm.
Let's have dental care be part of that. But he's also trying to do kind of a rebranding as well. Because if we think about those charlatan performers in the streets, right?
Mm-hmm.
He does not want to be associated with them at all. Right?
Right.
He wants to be like as far away as we can. And this is a problem throughout for dentists, really throughout, really into like the 1920s, is they're constantly concerned about these tooth drawers and these fakes, and they write extensively about this.
I know people who still think dentists are all crooks, like as far as what they try,
Yeah, I mean, someone who's read a lot of dental conference rules, I will say a lot of cosmetic dentistry is not needed at all in this country. But it's where you make your most profits. The majority of dentists these days primarily do cosmetic work.
Mm-hmm.
And not to knock dentists, there's a lot of them doing absolutely amazing work in front of care. And Lord knows I'm very grateful for my dentist. But yeah, there's
Sure.
still some connotations today.
Okay, so that treaty sort of changed the game. It changed the
He
playing
really
field.
did. And he really tried to guide the conversation started. And so once that starts in 1723 and then 1800, so, 80 years, over 700 treatises alone get published on the care of teeth, management of teeth, operation of teeth. It's in English, French, German, and a little bit in Italian as well. But so there's kind of this influx that just starts flooding the kind of marketplace and the medical landscape.
Sure.
So
and when did the British decide that we just don't care about this at all?
Exactly. I
always trying to find enemies, huh, Isaac?
I will say is every time I talk about my topic, everyone makes insert joke about British teeth here. And I'm just like, y'all don't understand. They did it right. Because, and what I mean by that is,
it's just
they're
braces, really. That's the biggest difference, right?
Basically, right?
Okay.
Well, it's partially because of this moment in the 18th century. They're consuming the same kind of materials. They're doing the same kind of dental procedures that Americans are doing during this time. All of that stuff. However, having a clean, white, bright smile does not get associated with being a good American the way that it does here in America. And once we make that association,
a good British citizen or whatever. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So they don't make that association. It doesn't they don't have that. It's no longer you're a good British subject if you have good clean teeth, right? So actually in many cases, so as a friendly reminder, where we can think about the proliferation not only of braces, but teeth whitening, right? And kind of alternative teeth whitening. There is no medical need for teeth whitening at all. It is normal as we age and with our diets for teeth to change color a little bit. There's a reason why most parts of the world make fun of Americans because of our clean, white, bright, ching Hollywood smile, because we associate it with being a good American, where the Brits didn't. So for them, they actually had great dental care and should probably still have better dental care than we do. But they don't have that kind of association on the look and the aesthetic as much. And so thus we get all the jokes about Brits and bad teeth.
Listen, I'm going to have to mute all of our British listeners in the comments. Now they're going, now you're out there batting for them.
So these treatises, is this what makes it more personal? Is this what makes it a moral issue? Is it telling you how to care for your teeth, and therefore if you don't listen, now you're lazy, you're immoral, you're not American? Sort of, how do these treatises, what in the world did they say that makes Americans feel like, oh, good teeth are inherently American? Because we like to do that with a lot of stuff.
We certainly do. And I would say the treatises are
apple pie.
Exactly, right. They're one thread that are all kind of coming together to build that association. But we can certainly see in a lot of the treatises, they're making certainly a lot of language and in many cases, particularly gendered language, when they start really kind of attacking particularly women for, engaging with things like tooth whitening and other kinds of procedures like that, even though those were originally actually domestic recipes from women that were then taken out, extracted right from the domestic sphere and then marketed back to women. And then once they started utilizing those procedures, then all these medical professionals will then write critiquing the use of those same products that they literally just sold. So, you kind of see this kind of process. So you will often see things about, to the country women, to the countrymen. You'll see kind of small languages, particularly in these medical treaties, but there's always a preface. And there's also in the advertisement. So the preface and the advertisement is where we really see them making a lot of kind of social demands or assumptions that are kind of based on that. You will also see, flip side, a lot of, quite frankly, racialized language, right? They'll talk about, the teeth of folks from, Africa, the teeth of folks from China, the teeth from other parts of the world. And they'll use it as a way to be like, oh, but we as elite kind of Westerners, right? We do this way kind of a thing. But often it gets kind of complicated because in many cases they're also applauding the teeth of non-Westerners, particularly folks coming from Africa, because they're not consuming sugar in the diet the way that Westerners start to do. So essentially they have, quote, better teeth or healthier teeth because they're not kind of literally rotting from the sugar trade as well. So it's a really interesting kind of racialized play that those connotations are kind of happening within
Huh.
that framework. So you're certainly seeing with the medical treaties, you're seeing these kind of like casual, kind of passive discourses around kind of this is what you should be doing, both for aesthetics as well as if you're going to be a good, a good countrywoman, this is what you're going to do. So you'll see it
Right.
happening there. But those associations are also happening from lots of other different kinds of threads. So one of the big threads is going to be the consumer revolution that's happening throughout the late 18th century, where all of a sudden I can now buy a lot of goods, right? Now there's more and more, there's porcelain, there's textiles, there's foodstuffs, all this different stuff is kind of flooding the marketplace. And if I'm an elite person, this becomes a problem because now a bunch of middling and non-elite folks can also buy this stuff,
Right.
right?
Oh, so you don't want it anymore.
You don't want it anymore. So how do
Mm-mm.
I prove to you that I'm rich, right? How do I do that? I do it
Right.
through my physical body itself. The
Hmm.
body becomes the place where I can market. It's in some ways how I'm going to hold my head, move my hands, kind of hold my body. We can think about kind of finishing school or dancing, right, is a great example where we see people really kind of this kind of bodily mastery that's happening there. But that also includes things like caring for the teeth. So now I can prove I'm an elite person because I've got this clean, white, bright smile. And I can really internalize that kind of more and more and more within my elite body. So you've got the consumer revolution, these medical treatises. You also start to see it just starts to get taught in schools. Like I said, after the American Revolution, there's a lot of anxiety. What does it mean to be an American? What does it
Right.
look like to be an American? How do we teach people how to be Americans?
Hmm.
Well, we teach them at school, at all these seminaries that get established. And at many of these seminaries, hygiene and oral hygiene in particular is really heavily focused on. So much so that I have letters from parents. They're writing to these principals, basically kvetching that they're not attending to their daughters' mouths as well as they should be, and they need to be. Otherwise, they are not going to be able not have good marriage, prospects, and they're going to be seen as a suspect essentially without this kind of care. So you're getting kind of an educational
Good
spaces
heavens.
too. So there's all these different kinds of threads that are kind of coming together. We're starting to make these associations for elites. And then there's that kind of reverse. We're also making all these kind of counter associations for both poor folks as well as a lot for enslaved people as well in America.
That's fascinating. I had never would have thought of this as another one of those downstream effects of like, hey, when we created a society that has like a lot of class fluidity
Uh-huh.
and it doesn't have sort of inherited class status, like a
Mm-hmm.
more rigid, like
What do
British,
you
like how,
use?
how do you use it? This being one of those things that is like, how can I plant a flag? That
Right.
I'm not like you
Yeah,
or
exactly,
whatever.
exactly.
That's from like pretty crazy
Yeah.
that there was this much going on around teeth
Well, and I think
this
one of the
early. Like I
things,
wouldn't have thought it was this early. Genuinely.
right. And one of the things that Lucy, you talked about in one of your talks, which I'd never thought about before, is that sure, you can hide your teeth. So let's say, your teeth aren't attractive, you can hide them. But losing teeth can affect your jawline and like the
Yeah,
physical shape of your face.
it changed the way you look. Like you
Yeah.
look instantly 2 decades older than you did before. Like instantaneously, like overnight.
Well, exactly. And that's really what leads us to, Washington's famous dentures, right?
Right.
His dentures and the way that they're designed and structured, and most dentures at this time, it was never recommended to eat with them, right? I mean, they're not kind of hooked in the way that we have today, right?
Hmm.
Today, for most dentures, you have like a screw and kind of hook system. Good instinct. You don't want to be drilling in someone's mouth in, 1790. So a lot of dentures were actually not designed necessarily for eating. It was really for that aesthetic, for that kind of jaw structure, particularly for men like Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Lynn, as I know you are familiar with, Martha Washington, she also has dentures at the end of her life, but she asked for ones that are fundamentally different. She wants ones that are far more practical for everyday kind of use for both
Hmm.
speaking and eating some things for sure. You're not like having an apple here, but to give her kind of, some kind of more kind of, food access. Whereas Washington, his dentures are really designed to keep that very firm jaw that we really associate with him and what it means to be a leader, right? I think it'd be
Yeah.
difficult I think it's worth mentioning, both of our current presidential candidates in this moment have artificial teeth,
Mhm.
and all of that. We can't imagine seeing either one of them with those hollow
Yeah.
Right.
gaps, right? That wouldn't be a president. That's not what a leader looks like, right?
Right.
And that's something that we think of today. And Washington is really that first leader in America that really, instills that into our American kind of psyche.
Okay, I think we've sufficiently gotten far enough into this
Yes.
that
The
if
big
people are going to turn it
question.
off now, so be it. So, what were the dentures made out of?
Yeah, so Washington, first of all, had it's kind of unknown how many sets of dentures that he had throughout his lifetime. So I've seen numbers as low as 9 and as many as like 18. They're really hard to say. He had a lot of different kind of sets of dentures, and he had multiple different sets at the same time.
Wow.
If you're a glasses wearer like myself, I have my normal glasses, but I have my backup glasses, and I've got my
Yeah.
contacts, right?
Right.
It's a similar kind of thing, right? Especially because a lot of the times they would get stained or broken, and one of the problems with dentures during this time period, and particularly for Washington, is what do you kind of make the teeth out of, right?
Mhm.
And kind of so the question is like, what do you make the teeth out of, and how do you attach it to your head? So, for example, Washington's dentures he had when he was sworn in to office in 1789. The base was made out of ivory, and there's actually a hole on one side. He only had one remaining tooth in his head when he was sworn in, at the age of 57, I believe. And so the denture would sit on top of his kind of jaw and would hook under where that hole was, where the remaining molar was. So that kind of
Oh.
grounded it
So it would
there.
slot through the hole, and then it would keep it in place. Okay.
Exactly. And I've been able to handle these dentures. They're currently housed at the New York Academy for Medicine.
Wow, that's
You
cool.
pick them up. Yeah, it was. I cried picking
Oh
them
my
up and just
gosh.
feeling the weight of history, both
Did you
literally and figuratively
did you
speaking.
did you try to put them in your mouth?
I know too much is the problem. So no, I did not, and I somehow I don't think the archivist would have let me
This is
keep
why they
that.
don't let me into archives.
Exactly. Yeah.
They
Gotta
won't
keep
now.
your stuff out somehow.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so you can actually see, you can like pick it up, and there's daylight. Like that's how they would have attached there. Later ones that are currently housed at Mount Vernon, which are kind of the set that I think most people are familiar with.
Mhm.
Was a lead tin alloy kind of base, so that's kind of what's there. They're going to have kind of a silver and kind of bronze and other kind of copper kind of wiring there, particularly for a spring-loaded hinge. So that gets to our question: what do you do? How do you make it stay in your mouth if you don't have any teeth left to kind of anchor it? You do it through a spring-loaded hinge. And this was a designs that were really coming out of France during this time period. So essentially what that means is when we think about Washington, the signature kind of portrait of Washington, the Gilbert Stuart that's on the dollar bill, he looks pretty cranky, right? Like he has this
Yeah.
really kind of intense thing. The reason why is he has to physically keep his jaw closed because it's spring-loaded. Otherwise, if he slackens those jaw muscles, the springs are so powerful, they can basically malfunction and pop open his mouth and pop out of his mouth onto the table, which happened to Charles Wilson Peel at a dinner party with Dolly Madison at one point.
That
I
story
was
has
gonna
not been
ask.
told enough. I've never heard that before, and I love it.
It's so great. And every time I tell the story, I'm just like, I so want to know what Dolly said in that moment.
It's like that meme of that like 100-year-old grandma blowing out the candles, and she blows out her dentures.
And the teeth come out.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's, and I
It's
feel
literally
for the
that.
and you can also imagine like the decorum of that moment too.
Right.
It's like, oh my word, right? I mean, that's an intense social interaction, to put it mildly. But that's really why Washington has that really firm kind of those jaws. His jaws are really, really working hard to maintain that. So the teeth, that's how they ended up staying kind of in his head, was through the spring-loaded kind of tension. And the other big question is, what do you make teeth out of, right? So this is before we have the rise of good artificial teeth. Things like porcelain and things like that later on basically get crafted in such a way that they can maintain kind of pressure and all of that. But that's not until later, around 1820 is really when that becomes solidified, and all of that. But it was big business. I mean, even Josiah Wedgwood was looking into how to make artificial teeth. There was a big market out there for this product. So instead, what you have to do is you are going to kind of you're going to see ivory. Sometimes it's going to be elephant ivory. Sometimes it's going to be hippopotamus tusks, things like that. Are the things you're going to use. So you're going to be importing that from Africa. You're also going to see folks utilizing North American domesticated animals, or if they're in England or in France, so things like cows, pigs, things like that. Those things, they don't have they don't have like a grain in the way that like our teeth are actually, if you bisect them, they look like tree. They have rings, just like a tree. As you can actually
What?
count how old someone is based on the rings in their mouth, right?
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
ivory is also in a more circular thing, so you can basically like whittle it into a good size. Whereas North American domesticated animal teeth, you kind of end up like kind of chipping them, a chipping process versus
Oh,
kind of a
interesting.
whittling. And so those teeth would be used. However, ivory and bone and North American animals' teeth and things like that, they don't have natural enamel on them.
Hmm.
So they're going to decay really quickly. So kind of the gold standard for fake teeth were actually real teeth, was using human teeth. Those were seen as kind of the best one. They both looked the best. They also stayed in there, the mouth, stayed in the denture the longest.
Hmm.
Because one of the problems with ivory, as saliva and the stomach acid interacts with it, it essentially starts to off gas as it starts to decay. So it leads to more decay of the other teeth that are there, but also makes this really kind of putrid breath as well.
Ugh,
So for all these different reasons, human teeth become more and more and more the kind of better option
sure.
for that. But that even still, those are going to have to be replaced, once a year, every couple of years. And so people like Washington and other dentists are in constant demand for human teeth.
And where are they coming from? Who is selling them? What in the where are all these teeth coming from? That's a lot of teeth if you need to change it every
Yeah, he
year.
had like 18
That's a
sets of this
lot of
thing.
teeth.
Yeah, so, yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
lot of teeth, and I will say is most of these dentures too are a combination of items. So you'll certainly
Right.
the front, you tend to your kind of top dollar teeth
Hmm.
are the front teeth, right? The ones you mentioned about your aunt missing, these front four, right? Those are the
Right.
ones you see the most. Those tended to be human teeth, if kind of all possible,
Hmm.
and then you'd use other kind of species for other things. So very rarely would you see a denture that's all human
Sure.
teeth,
Sure.
things like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, so there's really kind of three main sources where these human teeth are coming from. And I think once again, like, this is going to be a really visceral moment and an uncomfortable moment, and we want to acknowledge that and the kind of historic moment of that. But also understand at the same time that, we need to remind that these 18th century folks do not have the same kind of personal relationship with our teeth as we do today. That
Right.
doesn't make it better or anything like that or less traumatic, but I think it's always worth to kind of keep in mind a little bit. So if you were to open kind of any 18th century newspaper, you'll see advertisements for dentists for buying teeth. Typically often prefer live teeth because they could be employed both in dentures or in a procedure that was very popular and throughout the 1770s to the 1790s called live tooth transplants, where you wanted live tooth, where you would transplant it into the mouth of someone. And so you would generally get two guineas for your front teeth. So for each one of those front ones. So, for example, in 1784, John Templeton in Boston has an ad in the newspaper that says, live teeth, I would buy your teeth for 2 guineas. So I was able to kind of look at what is the kind of average wages and things like that for
Yeah, like
folks.
how much is that?
And yeah, what does it actually mean? What do 2 guineas mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in 1784 in Massachusetts, those 2 guineas, that's going to be about what your wages are going to be for about 20 days if you're a day laborer, a male day laborer.
Wow.
So it's about 20 days worth of
So
work.
that's not enough.
Right, exactly.
This
It
dude is
feels like
undercharging.
it's one of those where you're just like, really? That's all? Like, and so I think that's worth kind of noting, like, that tells a little about the relationship people had with their mouth, but it
Yeah.
Yeah,
also tells a little bit kind of the desperate situations that people find themselves
sure.
in.
Right.
And kind of that need, right, for that. I mean, I think a lot of folks are more familiar with this if you think about, the novel and the musical Les Mis, right, where the main character, sells her teeth and her hair, right. Now her
Mhm.
hair is going to grow back, but she is permanently marked, right, by having these gaps in their mouths. So if it's all of a sudden associated of being a good American, now you have a whole population of people that are permanently barred from being part of that kind
Hmm.
of
Right.
ideology, right? So that's one place you're going to see it are going to be, poor folks, both free and semi-free, and enslaved people, kind of selling their teeth through these kinds of official transactions
Hmm.
that we'll see. Um, the other place that people always like to bring up, and I think it's worth obviously noting, in the Washington ledgers, there is a purchase of 9 teeth from the enslaved population at Mount Vernon.
Mhm.
Washington does purchase these teeth from the enslaved, and I think it's just important to note, one, he pays about half of the market value. So if folks had walked, had gone
Come on
down to
now.
Alexandria, they would have gotten about double what they received. But it's also, I think, for folks who are, for most Americans anyway, when we think about slavery, we tend to think about 19th century
Yeah.
antebellum, 12 years a slave.
Right.
Enslavement. And 18th century enslavement does look a little bit different in the sense that a lot of enslaved people did have purchasing power, right, and did have kind of access to goods. It's not uncommon for Washington and others to be buying goods from the enslaved. These are typically foodstuffs.
Hmm.
Keep in mind, most enslavers, including Washington, gave starvation diets in terms of the rations for enslaved people. So to literally survive, folks had to forage. They had to have, raise their own poultry, have vegetable gardens, and and hunt and game and fish and things like that as well. So Washington is regularly purchasing foodstuffs from the enslaved population. But teeth are obviously kind of a different kind of thing. Those 9 teeth did not end up in Washington's dentures. He doesn't get dentures until later on
Okay.
in his life. They're purchased on behalf of a dentist that is there. But there certainly were potentially,
Wasn't even
teeth.
for him, and he gave him the wholesale price. Come on now.
Exactly,
Right?
exactly. It's, and we don't know what those conversations looked like. I mean, I
Sure,
think
right.
it's really important for us to we don't know what those conversations looked like.
Right.
But I mean, I think certainly the kind of status of the individual, certainly suggests kind of exactly what is that cheaper rate essentially.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, even if
Essentially.
there is purchasing power, like there is a slightly more autonomy in sort of like you being able to buy and sell to the person who is enslaving you. I mean, it's not devoid of coercion, right? And it's not devoid of the
Absolutely.
person who is not, like
Absolutely.
owns your personhood, really. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we can see it particularly in Charleston, South Carolina, where several dentists are purchasing teeth from enslaved people and really mark in their advertisements that, they're not going to be purchasing from enslaved individuals. And this isn't done of some kind of kindness or anything, but it was in kind of the legal market records in Charleston about what kind of goods enslaved people could buy and sell, both by, on their own behalf and also on behalf of their enslaver. Keep in mind, Charleston is primarily a black city, particularly most of the year when it's too hot and most of the white folk and the planters kind of, leave. And so you could sell kind of fruits and vegetables, but there was a lot of goods you couldn't sell. And part of that included things like teeth and hair because it was seen as this kind of commodification in a different kind of way. So,
Wow.
there's obviously, kind of a different relationship fundamentally there. So, so there certainly were enslaved people selling teeth. And I don't have any evidence of this, so I haven't found direct ones of enslavers directly taking teeth, for their own services. But obviously we don't know, but we do certainly know that there is this kind of circulation and economy and awareness of teeth, particularly by enslavers. And I can talk about that in all the other ways that they're really tracking enslaved mouths. But the teeth that that kind of Washington and his dentist John Greenwood and others are kind of constantly for. So potentially came from newspaper advertisements, like I said, poor folk kind of selling, potentially from enslaved populations. But kind of the big place where I think the majority of them, especially for a lot of these later dentures, are coming from, are primarily coming stripped from battlefield dead, primarily in Europe. So one thing that we have for record is John Greenwood. John Greenwood is Washington's final dentist. He's the one who makes a lot of those kind of the iconic pairs that we see today. And in 1706, Greenwood travels to France. He's a veteran of the American Revolution. And while he is there, he hangs out with, the Marquis de Lafayette and all of that. He gets a commemorative coin, but he also meets up with one of the prominent dentists in Paris. And there, and through a conversation, they start to clearly strike up a business deal. About a year later, in 1807, he receives a shipment of 4,300 human teeth.
4,000.
What?
4,300 human teeth. Yes. So he receives this shipment, and he originally only wants 1,000, but then he's like, actually, if you can get me three more 1,000, I'll take them, right? So there's clearly a big need. There's a demand, right,
Yeah.
for this product. And what's really striking about this kind of correspondence between Greenwood and this French dentist is that it is just like any other business transaction during this moment. They have a factor, a go-between, who's kind of negotiating and kind of doing the nitty-gritty in terms of like, oh, he'll get it to this captain, he'll give it to you, and we'll pass it that way. There's literal itemized receipts for this. So when Greenwood gets it, he takes and counts every single tooth and organizes it in terms of quality and as well as which position within the mouth.
Oh, right.
And when he does that, he's pretty cranky because instead of it being 4,300 human teeth, it's only 4,211 teeth. So So
did
he's
count.
short, 89 teeth. So he's cranky about that, but he's also cranky at the quality. It's a quality control issue for him,
Mm-hmm.
essentially. He literally writes out, I've got, 298 good front teeth. I've got, X number of bad front teeth. I've got a bunch of these canines, or what they would call eye teeth, because the canines are underneath our eye.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, I can't use these. They're difficult for me to use. And so he's pretty upset about the kind of quality that he gets, right?
Right.
So,
Huh.
but he's fine because he's like, I can pawn this off on a not so good dentist. But what this shipment and this entire correspondence shows us, I mean, and there's probably at least, I don't know, 10 letters back and forth between this dentist and Greenwood, and then there's Factor Lynch. They're kind of all in conversation with each other over the course of about a year. Is that this is just business as usual. It
Right.
meets all of the same kind of qualifications for any other kind of imports during this time, whether it's Madeira or fabric or anything like that. But in this case, it's literally human teeth, which really suggests that this is not a one-off kind of a thing, but
Right.
rather something that was kind of heavily kind of circulating. Nor do you feel any kind of discomfort from them either. This is just business as usual. And the majority of those teeth that are coming from France are coming from battlefield dead as well.
Huh.
It's like a
I do
fashion
remember. I don't know
item.
if we right.
You know?
I don't remember whether we talked about this on the podcast or whether it was in a conversation that we had offline, Lynn. But I do remember this story of this guy. He was French, and he was knocked unconscious during a battle or something like that, and regained consciousness as someone he had already been stripped of all of his clothing,
Oh, yeah.
and someone was trying to remove his teeth. And that's when he came to back and then was horrified at what was going on. But that there was, so people would just that dentist in France must have hired someone or a team. I mean, it's 4,000. So it must have been many people,
Yeah.
right?
I also think folks knew this was part of the economy, right? They
Right.
knew as well that I can show up at this person's doorstep with
With a bunch of teeth.
a
Oh,
bunch of
okay.
teeth, right? And we can see this later, especially when the anxiety is a little bit later around grave robbing and things like that. There is still also, tooth extract, taking teeth from that was sort of thing. I mean, this was also still prominent during the American Civil War. During the American Civil War, folks would scavenge the bodies as well and extract teeth. In this case, they actually got shipped back to Europe. And this was such a common kind of means. And once again, I mean, I think it's easy, and there's a desire to really kind of demonize, these folks that are, stripping the physical bodies
Sure.
of
Yeah.
dead soldiers. But it's these are also people in very marginalized,
Yeah.
Points of survival where, their villages, all of their food stock has been lost. I mean, they've really, they're living through war.
Right.
This was particularly France during the early 18th century. This became such a prominent thing that for a long time, kind of all human teeth that were used in any kind of dentistry were referred to as, quote, Waterloo teeth from the amount that came out after the Battle of Waterloo. So, I mean,
Oh, my goodness.
it even had its own kind of jokey name about it,
Right.
and all of that. So it was clearly, really, part of the kind of economic infrastructure, especially for folks and refugees kind of on this kind of marginalized society, of knowing I can show up at this dentist and have a bag of teeth. In the same way, in the history of kind of medicine and surgery and medical schools, the amount of individuals who knew, if I go through this back door and knock 3 times, if I've got a corpse that the medical school needs to practice autopsies and things like that. There's, that economy is happening there. It's kind of known that is a place.
Yeah, we actually did an episode last season about a grave robbing ring out of Indianapolis around the turn of the century, and it was an enormous business. That was kind of a handshake under the table kind of deal. Involved
Everyone
ice
knew
cream
they were doing it.
parlors.
Oh yeah, and I believe a lot of those from at least that ring and several others all ended up here at my institution, the University of Michigan Medical School, as well.
Yeah, it was a real thing. I think we actually did. Someone reached out and said that their relative was buried at one of these. Well, a listener of ours reached out to. So our relative is buried at one of these cemeteries that was frequently grave robbed and was buried there at this time, and they're unsure about whether this person's actually in their grave or not.
Yeah,
which is pretty crazy. But yeah, I think it's the point that you made is well taken, and that you can't moralize the violence inherent at the bottom level of poverty, the destitute. There is violence inherent in that part of society, no matter what you're doing, really. So those aren't moral failings. It's it's unfortunate consequence of where they are in society. But still, I'll say it one more time, gross. Just
that's like the thesis for all of this. It is.
I feel like that should be in your title somewhere. It should be gross, colon. The history of teeth.
If you wanted to write a popular history book about this after you're done, you think that's what it'd be.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, kind of a grossology kind of a thing.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And a great kids book too. I mean, you could do both.
Oh, absolutely. A colleague of mine does history of maggots, and I was like, we need to do like a gross out panel.
Oh my god!
Sometime.
Do a series. It's the gross series.
Exactly. Yeah.
Can we get their name?
Only during the dinner hour. People need to be eating and very uncomfortable.
Can we get their name? We need a Halloween episode.
Yeah.
But this has been genuinely an enlightening and fascinating discussion. This is weird thing to ask, because we generally ask some of our guests, is there some place that people can go visit to see cool things relating to the topic that we just spoke about? But does that apply to what?
There's got to be like a dental museum, right?
It does. Right? There's more dental museums out there than you'd think. Trust me, because I've been to all of them now. The National Dentistry Museum is actually in Baltimore, and it's there because part of my work is actually really looking at kind of before how did we get all these different kind of changing ideas to get things like the establishment of dental schools.
Right.
So the first dental schools was really established through Johns Hopkins. So it's in Baltimore and it's now separate. And in a lot of the interpretation you're going to see at most of these dental museums are really kind of, 1830s, 40s and up, where they're really thinking more about kind of the institutional kind of medical practice kind of versus the kind of cultural change. So that's one place you can certainly go to and check it out. Obviously, you can see the Dentures at George Washington's Mount Vernon. However, they are going to be taking down off display in mid-July and probably will not be up for another, I think it's like a year or so as they're redoing the
so you got like a week. Get in there.
Exactly. But they have a lot of great resources on their website as well. So those are kind of the main two places I'd recommend. I'd encourage you to check out, like I said, there's a surprising amount of small dentistry museums. There's one in Ann Arbor, Michigan as well, and other places often paired with dental schools.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, like we always say that you probably live within a 2-hour drive of something cool historically, and apparently that includes dentistry museums, which is something I did not know existed until just now.
And you'll probably see things. I mean, there's a Civil War Medical Museum in Richmond, and they have teeth things. They have the saw that looks exactly like today's, that they'd saw off an arm. So a lot of Civil War museums and even some Revolutionary will have that.
If they're going to have medical things, because especially early wars, and this is my kind of favorite fun facts about dentistry, and it's more exciting than it sounds. But one of the reasons why it becomes such a big thing in America, and one reason why we kind of learn about it, is once again that French guy who made it all institutional. They got all their military folks to be trained in it, so that way during battles, this is when you have muskets, right? So you need to have your troops have strong teeth to be able to tear open gunpowder packets.
That's right.
While they're loading their muzzle. And so also once, the French come, basically to, bail us out during the Rev War, part of what they bring is this kind of dental training. That's all of these surgeons in the war learn about this, and all these soldiers also then learn about this, and then they kind of then spread back out after the war. So any place where you're going to see any kind of, history of medicine, history of war, you're going to see in a lot of those surgeons' bags, you're going to see what's called a turnkey or a tooth key, which kind of maybe even have the same kind of physical strength as maybe a blacksmith, but you could use kind of physics to kind of anchor it and with a fulcrum kind of pull the tooth out. Though unfortunately it often left stumps and didn't fully extract the tooth. But pretty much every medical surgeon or every military doctor is going to have a set of those in their bag as well.
Wow. Well, neat. So
that's fascinating.
I'll leave everyone on that unfortunate note, I suppose. So as always, this episode was brought to you by our supporters over on Patreon. And you can, if you ever want to see behind the scenes content, early access to things, as well as book giveaways of signed books of some of the authors that we interview, please go check us out at patreon.com/primarysourcemedia. You can also listen to this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Please share it with a friend who maybe also is into teeth. And you can check out video versions and see Lucy's pearly white smile over on our YouTube channel. Just search for Too Complicated for History or Primary Source Media. And just one last thing, Lucy, where can our listeners follow you or find
Yeah,
you? And if want to keep up with your work, if they're going to anxiously await your public, you finishing
I
up your
am.
dissertation and publishing a book on
Yeah,
this.
for the best place to find me is at the University of Michigan's history website. It's got my contact information on there. I've also, if you want to know more about this topic, I've given a series of kind of public talks that are also available on YouTube as well through various cultural institutions as well. So if you're dying to know more about our founding fathers and teeth, I'd recommend to go check those out as well.
And we'll put
Great. And
links in
we'll
the
throw some
show
of the links
notes.
of those into our into our show
Right.
notes.
So
So if
one
anyone's
click
curious.
away.
One click away. Anyway, thanks so much again, Lucy. This was gross and wonderful.
It was awesome. Thank you, Lucy.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.